You know, better than 90% of the airsoft guns that we sell these days come equipped with some sort of scope or optic on it. Problem is, most of the guns I see when people bring them in for maintenance or repairs are not sighted in properly. Now mind you, airsoft guns are not the most accurate gun in the world. It's a smoothbore gun, so there's no rifling to stabilize the bullet, so they're inherently inaccurate. But if your scope is not zeroed properly, there's no way you're going to hit your target. So this week I thought I'd give you a quick tutorial on how to zero in your scope for airsoft. Now the first thing you have to consider when you're sighting in an airsoft gun is what is the most likely range to your target going to be. In other words, when you're shooting an airsoft gun, the BB doesn't travel in a straight line. It travels in something of an arc and starts to fall away as it goes further, where when you're looking through the sight, you're looking at a straight line. So you have to figure out when you're going to line that sight up with the trajectory of the BB so that they intersect at the right point. If you're a CQB guy, that point's probably going to be somewhere maybe 20 to 25 yards. If you're shooting outdoors with an AEG, that's probably going to be about 150 feet or 50 yards. And if you're using a high-end sniper gun, that range might be out to about 100 yards if you're pretty good. So you have to figure that out so that you set your target at the appropriate distance. So the next thing you have to consider before you even consider sighting in your gun is the hop-up set up properly on your gun? So what's hop-up, right? Well, in airsoft guns, the barrels have absolutely no rifling in them. They're basically smoothbore, so there's nothing to stabilize the bullet when you shoot it. In a normal firearm, the barrels have a rifling that's twisted along the barrel so that when you fire the bullet, it gives it a spin, which stabilizes the bullet. Kind of like when a quarterback throws a football, he throws it in a spiraling motion, which stabilizes the football and allows it to go more accurately. In airsoft, there's none of that. Basically, the barrels are just smoothbore, so it tends to be a little more random, and that's why airsoft guns are not necessarily as accurate as other firearms that are out there. What the manufacturers try to do to stabilize the bullet is they cut a notch into the back of the barrel and then they install a rubber sleeve over it, which has a nub on the sleeve. So when you chamber the BB into the breech, it actually makes contact with this rubber nub. So when you fire it, it gives it a backspin, which stabilizes the BB as it goes out. Now, with airsoft guns, obviously there's different weight BBs, so the same settings on that hop-up are not going to work for every weight BB, and this needs to be adjusted based on the weight of the BBs that you're using. Now, if all airsoft BBs were the same weight, you wouldn't have to worry about being able to adjust the hop-up on your gun. But since there are different weights of BBs, that's why you have a variable setting on your hop-up for your airsoft gun. So number one, settle on a brand and a weight of the BBs that you're going to be using and use them consistently. If you're always changing brands or changing the weights, you're always going to be fiddling with your hop-up unit. So always use the same brand and the same weight, and you won't have to worry about messing with this over and over again. So once you've settled on that, go ahead and set up your hop-up. So how do you do that? You basically just shoot the gun and watch what the BB's doing. If it's falling off too fast, you dial in a little more hop-up until you get a nice flat trajectory out of it. If the BB starts to go up a little bit, you know that you're adding too much hop-up and you basically back off until you get that nice flat trajectory. The BB is going to fall off at some point. It's not going to be a completely flat trajectory, so you just basically get to compromise until you're getting the flattest possible trajectory that you can get. And then once you've got that, you're ready to go to the next step. Now it's important to make sure that your scope is installed properly on the gun before you get too far along with trying to sight it in, otherwise you're just going to waste a lot of time. First of all, check all of the set screws that hold the scope into its mount and make sure that they're torqued down nice and firm. You don't want to over torque them because you can actually distort the shape of your scope by over tightening them, so just until it's nice and firm and the scope's not wiggling around on the receiver. The next thing you're going to want to do is locate the windage and elevation turrets on your gun and make sure they're in the correct position for your particular scope. First of all, most of the turrets normally come with a dust cap installed on them, which keeps them from getting banged around when you're in the field. And when you're done, you're going to want to reinstall those dust caps. You have the windage and elevation turrets. Windage adjusts the left and right, which should be on the side of the gun, and elevation adjusts the up and down, which should be on the top of the gun. So if you're looking on the top of the scope and you see an L or an R, it basically means that your scope is sideways, so you need to rotate it until the L or R is on the side of the scope. Now, one nice thing about the M4 is you can actually remove the upper receiver from the gun and leave the barrel in it so that you can try bore sighting it. To bore sight a gun, you're basically going to secure the gun down so that it's not going to move and manually look through the barrel and aim it at a target, and then look through the scope and make sure that the scope is aimed at the same target, and just basically adjust the windage and the elevation until the two line up. Another gun that's capable of being manually bore sighted is the P90. The really cool thing about this is that you can remove the upper receiver from the stock, which leaves the barrel and the scope mount intact, so that you can secure this down on a shooting bench or a table, manually look through the barrel, aim it at your target, and then adjust your scope to be at the same point. Now, manual bore sighting is not designed to give you a finely tuned weapon. This is just roughly to get you into the ballpark so that you can go from there and do your fine tuning. Another way to bore sight your gun is to use a laser bore sighter. This works great on guns that you can't manually take apart and physically look down the barrel. This actually fits down the bore of the gun and gives you a laser dot exactly where your barrel is aiming at. So you can basically put that dot on your target and then align your sights with the laser. The nice thing about this is that it gives you a little bit of a better fine tuning than the manual way of roughly setting up your bore sighting, so that your fine tuning will actually go a lot faster if you use a laser bore sight. The next step is to start fine-tuning your gun in the way of zeroing your scope. The best bet for doing that is to get the gun into the most stable shooting position possible, and for that I recommend using a bipod. This is the T-Pod by Fab Arms, which basically gives you a forward grip that you can deploy into a bipod to get into a very stable shooting position. If you don't have a bipod available to you, you can use sandbags or some other way of stabilizing the gun. The idea is to get your shots as consistent as possible, which will give you better fine-tuning for your scope. So to do your fine tuning, I recommend doing it in groups of 3. You don't want to just take one shot at a time and try to use that as a reference for where the gun is shooting. Best bet is to do groups of 3 and use the average of those shots to give you an idea of where the gun is actually shooting. So let's say you took your first 3 shots and it gave you a result that looks something like this. What you want to do is look at the target and determine how much you want to adjust your scope to get those bullets into the center of the target. So if you're using a graduated target like the one that we're using, you can see that the bullets are about 2 inches low and about 2 inches to the right. So you want to move the bullets 2 inches to the left and 2 inches up. So how do you do that? Now, most of your higher end scopes will be calibrated in a way that they'll actually tell you how much you're moving the crosshair each time you're moving the turret 1 click. That's called your MOA, or your minute of angle. If you look at this particular scope, it says that 1 click equals a ½ inch at 100 yards. So each time I move this 1 click, it's moving the crosshair 1/2 inch, either up, down, left, right, depending on which turret you're turning and which direction you're turning it in. Now we're talking about airsoft here, so a lot of the scopes that are out there for airsoft aren't calibrated in such a way that they tell you what the MOA is for that particular scope. This one just tells you that moving it in a particular direction moves it up or down, but it doesn't give you an idea of how much it's moving it at what range. So you're going to have to use your best judgment. Best bet is start with like a quarter of a turn, take 3 more shots and see where that gets you. So let's say we took our next 3 shots and it gave us a result that looks something like this. We now know that a quarter of a turn at this particular range is going to move our point of impact exactly 1 inch. Now, if you're using a graduated scope that's actually calibrated, you can tell that at 100 yards this is going to move a ½ inch. So if your target is only, say, 50 yards away, you divide that number by 2 and that's how much it's going to actually move the crosshair. But on the uncalibrated scope, we now know that a quarter of a turn moves us 1 inch, so we can continue to adjust the scope to get the kind of result that we're looking for. So now we'll go ahead and adjust the windage, and that'll give us a result like this when we take our next 3 shots. So we now know that a quarter of a turn is giving us about 1 inch of movement on our point of impact. So when we look at our result, we now know that we need to move up and to the left about 1 inch. So 1/4 of a turn on both the elevation and the windage should put us in the center of the target. And let's see how that looks. Now, of course, you don't have to use the graduated targets like we did. You could just use a standard bullseye or just a piece of paper with an ink dot in the middle of it for that matter. The graph is nice because it gives you a lot more feedback as to exactly how much that bullet is moving. So if you're one of those sniper types and you want to take notes as to exactly how much your scope is moving at a particular range, you'll be able to calibrate it for 100 yards or 150 yards depending on how far out your target is. Now, if this all seems too complicated to you and you need us to do it, feel free to bring your gun by here. Be glad to go ahead and zero it in for you for a small fee, of course. Or if you got any questions, feel free to give us a call or stop in. Best bet is shoot us an email to our email address at replayairsoft@yahoo.com, and we'll take a few minutes to answer all your questions and get you on the right track. So until then, we'll see you the next time.